Okay, so nice to have you around, Dr. Emmanuel Goffi and the Professor Aco Momcilovic. So glad you could join us on this interview. Vera and I, Professor Vera Queiroz, Dr. Vera Queiroz and I are both so very happy to have you around to talk a little bit about ethics, human resources, artificial intelligence, new technologies, and everything in between. We are so very happy, don't you, Vera?
Yeah, very happy. And we have to really thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thanks so much, Professor Emmanuel. Thanks so much, Professor Ato. They are both members and founders of Global AI Ethic Institute, held in France, a fantastic organization, fantastic institute that are trying to develop some research and have some insights on artificial intelligence and ethics. This line of work, it's something very new.
Just to say that we are happy, and I can speak in my name, glad to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
I'd like to share with you, my friends, the first question. And Emmanuel, I'd like to hear a little bit, how would you define ethics? How does ethics manifest in environment, virtual environment? This very same question will be shared with Adolf then, but I'd like to hear you first, Emmanuel.
Simple question, but the answer is pretty complex actually, so I will try to make it as simple as possible. Let's say that ethics is the assessment of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And I'm not using the word right and wrong on purpose because there is a religious, meaning behind right and wrong that I don't want to use here. I want it to be really neutral. So when it comes to ethics, you have two sides of ethics. The first one is the study of what is acceptable and what is not, and the norms that have been created through this idea. And then the evaluation of a specific situation in a specific context. Which is ethics as we use it in everyday life when we're making choices. So ethics is mainly about that. It's something that is really depending on the context, once again, on the decision, on the individual and all the environment that it is in. So obviously the virtual environment has kind of its own ethics. I mean, ethics is applicable everywhere in the virtual environment as well. But the virtual environment is a bit more complex today because it makes lots of relation between lots of people that are not close to each other. And it raises lots of questions about the use of data and privacy. You've certainly heard about that, definitely. So it is just bringing some new questions to the existing questions regarding ethics.
What about you, Ato?
Well, it is, I would say that it is hard to say something meaningful after Emmanuel, because I think that he's really like top level expert with great explanations. So my only choice is maybe to add something from a little bit different perspective. So I would say that, of course, if we oversimplify it and say that ethics are connected, of course, with informing norms and behaviors that are influencing the behavior of people, of course, and they're obviously connected with morality. So what is interesting for me is the research of one psychologist, one of my colleagues. So he's called Kohlberg. So he did very interesting, Lawrence Kohlberg, so very interesting research in which he hypothesized that basically we have a pre-conventional level of morality, conventional level, and then post-conventional level. So basically in pre-conventional level, this is where the children are until the age of 9. So basically what is moral is kind of instilled in you by your parents. You're kind of accepting it without any criticism, and then after that you're old enough to get into the conventional phase. And in the conventional phase, we are speaking about the norms that are kind of infused through the society, and obviously we can see a lot of very different options that can happen there. And after the conventional level, then we have the post-conventional morality, where you basically are abandoning even the things that are coming from the society, and you're trying to formulate something for yourself and find some universal principles. So basically, when we are speaking, as also in the institute, we are trying to look at it from the multicultural level. So then this is obviously connected with the conventional phase, because how many different societies we have, that many conventional approaches are we going to have that people are going to be in. And what is interesting, in post-conventional phase, there were some kind of estimations, and only, let's say, from 9 to 13% of people ever get to the post-conventional phase. So those who kind of transcend the limitations and the norms that is their immediate society and the culture of their, for example, nation that is kind of infusing in them. So for me, that this is one maybe interesting comment that can contribute to our discussion. And then, of course, this is you mentioned how is it applicable in the virtual environment. So there are many answers to it, and some of those we are, of course, even now researching. But what is for sure clear, that in the virtual environment we are now having much more communication with the people from different societies. So definitely with the people from that are in the different conventional phase. So then this is kind of challenging us and our beliefs and making us to rethink our own behaviors and norms, and what is normal and what is right and what is wrong to us, and then try to kind of to communicate efficiently with others, respecting all of those differences. So I would say something like that. Yeah.
Great. Continue with you, Aito. It's a fact that ethics is fundamental in any recruitment process. What is the role of ethics in the online recruitment process?
So I was thinking about it for some time. So I guess that, first of all, the whole process is a little bit different online. So basically, if we are looking at the classical stages, so for example, the sourcing stage, the stage before the selection method itself, is a little bit different. So we are using different channels, online channels, of course, very often, and we are using different tools to attract those people. So even there we can and we should be careful, I would say, not to target the wrong audience or those who are, for some reasons, not a good fit for our positions. So obviously then, regarding the process online, there are different tests and questionnaires that are available and that are in use these days, from the classical IQ tests or personality tests, but also to tests of knowledge or some kind of specific skills. So I think that still most of the mistakes that people are doing, that recruiters are doing, are still connected with our biases and the lack of education of people who are involved in the recruitment process. So for example, me as a human resource consultant, I'm offering and providing to the managers and to the companies something, that education that is called selection skills, selection interview and recruitment skills, because it is important for them to understand the process, but also to understand our biases and our subjectivity. So when we exclude that part, then the process is getting a lot better. And then, of course, to return the question to the candidates, I think that there is a completely different set of mistakes that candidates can do in the process of recruitment. So, for example, inadequate CVs, improper pictures, and many other things. So there is also very important fact that we need to educate also the candidates who are applying and who are going through the recruitment process. I think that if we are just reflecting back, and I can do it as a recruiter because I'm doing it basically on the weekly basis, I think in general it is a bit harder to get the fine nuances of somebody's profile in online environment. We have less data points, so then maybe we are forced to jump into some kind of conclusions in certain segments. In some other segments, as I mentioned before, we might even have more data. So yeah.
Do you believe it is harder to recruit in online environment or face-to-face environment? Which one is harder?
Yeah. Well, I think that we are using online recruitment sometimes when the physical recruitment is not even possible. So, for example, when we are recruiting people from different countries or different continents. But for example, what part is also interesting for us and what we would like to know about the candidates is, can we assess their, for example, ethical and moral principles, right? And to that part, I unfortunately, I need to confess that it is very hard to estimate those, especially in a classical selection interview, because candidates, of course, can give us the socially desirable answers because they are easily recognizable. Any person of, I would say, average level of intelligence can recognize what is the answer that is perceived as good in most of the countries. So partially, we are solving it with the behavioral structured interview, in which we are basically exploring the real experience and previous actions that some person, some candidate did. So then we are trying to assess also his maybe values or ethics. So it is a little bit then better, and of course we need to connect it with background checks. But my general conclusion would be that basically there is also some responsibility on the organization, that there is a priority to create a system that will influence all of the employees to behave in an ethical way, in the sense of they are promoting and rewarding ethical behavior and recognizing and, let's say, punishing unethical behavior on time. So then this depends, of course, on the definitions that every company and every culture might do. So we have this saying in Croatia, like, opportunity makes the thief, right? So nobody is a thief unless you put him in the right opportunity, but then a lot of people are going to become thieves. So I would say that in general, it is very often on the top management, their responsibility to organize and to structure the system and to lead with their example.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for your answer, Ato. And this give me the opportunity to share this with Emmanuel. What causes disrespect to the ethics in the virtual spaces, Emmanuel? Are those causes the same that occurred in the non-virtual environment? What do you think, Emmanuel? Do non-virtual environments influences virtual environments and vice versa? What do you think, or what are your thoughts on this, Emmanuel, please?
I guess that's a really deep question. Actually, you basically have the same reason that are causing disrespect for, let's say, ethics in the virtual space than in the non-virtual space. Basically, you have the same thing. The only point with the virtual, with the digital, is that it emphasizes the fact that because you are not close to people, because you cannot see them directly, because you have this screen that is behind, between you and them, you feel safer to do things that might not be acceptable. And then you can also hide behind your keyboard, your computer. You can have this kind of behaviors that you would not have in real life, just because you would not dare to do that, because you would know the risk, right? So you feel safer. It's a bit like, most of the time I used to say that it's a bit like when you're in a car, right? And something happened outside of the car, and you feel like you can insult people from the inside of your car just because you know that no one will hurt you, right? You can just go through, and that you will be safe. So this is the big issue that we have with the virtual spaces, that gives you this sense that you can do whatever you want, because at some point you will not be there will not be sanctions for you, right? So this is the thing that is emphasized by the virtual space. Also, obviously, You know that Marshall McLuhan said that we are living in a global village, and this global village with the new technology has been made smaller. So it means that I can have information about you and about people that are really far away from me, in an easiest way. So I can be really intrusive in the lives of lots of people. So I can do things that I would not do in another context, in another setting, because I would not be able to reach out to the data and to the information that are needed to hurt people and to influence them, etc. So the technology and the virtual space gives you much more power than the real life, right? Because you can enter into the lives of people. You can know what to do if you want to hurt them or if you want to influence their behaviors. So basically that's the point. But ethical behavior is not directly related to the fact that you are in a virtual environment or a non-virtual environment. It's all about, as Aco was saying, it's all about what you've learned from convention, which are the norms called morals, and the way that you're using it in specific situation, which is what we call ethics. How do you apply those norms that you've been learned in a specific situation, given lots of other elements that you will take into account in your decision-making process. So it's basically about you and what you are and how you feel. I mean, people that do not want to hurt, that are not keen on hurting others, they will not do so even if they are in a virtual space. Basically, people that are doing bad things through the digital are people that would do exactly the same thing if they had the occasion outside of the digital space. As Aco was saying, it's all about the opportunity that you've been given. So if I give you the tool to hurt, and inside yourself you want to hurt, you will do it. But if you don't want to hurt inside yourself, then you can have all the tools in the world. You will not hurt others people, right? So the causes that are actually causing disrespect in the virtual environment are basically, I guess, the same as the one that are in the non-virtual environment. It's all about human beings. You know, what you are, what you expect, what you want to do. That can be greed, that can be your ego, that can be revenge, that can be lots of things that makes you do things that are considered as bad. But there is a big issue in answering this question, because ethics, as I was saying, it is a really complex notion, right? And we use, and that's something that we must be really aware of, we used to use it in place of good, right? Ethical behavior does not mean that you're doing good. Ethical encompasses what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, right? So even when you're acting in a way that is not acceptable, you are acting ethically. That can sound a little bit weird, but ethics is the evaluation of what is acceptable, but also of what is not acceptable. So basically, once again, human beings will act the same way in the digital as they are acting in the real life. But if they are given some more power, some of those people will use it for non-acceptable purposes. And obviously, those two environments, those two settings are clearly related. There is no way to separate them totally, right? And obviously, they are influencing each other all the time. And we can see that in the way that people are reacting to each other when you go on social networks, for example. People are really aggressive, and we can feel that this aggressivity that has been created by the fact that you are protected by your screen, and no one will come to your place and punch you in the face because you insulted him or her online. Then this feeling that you have can just grow your aggressivity, and you will obviously bring this aggressivity in the real world, in the non-virtual world. And on the other hand, on the other side, obviously, if you have aggressive behaviors in your everyday lives, obviously you will bring that into the virtual environment, right? Aco was mentioning something that is really interesting, which is also related to this global village that has been the notion that's been created by Marshall McLuhan, is the fact that we are interacting with people that are really different from us, culturally speaking, right? And sometimes it's really hard to understand that. And sometimes we have a priori about this or that culture, this or that country. And it makes us being a little bit judgmental and even aggressive toward those people just because we don't agree with what they're doing, instead of listening, trying to understand, which is what we're trying to do with the Global AI Ethics Institute. We're trying to raise this awareness about difference of culture, and just doesn't mean that you have to agree with all culture. It means that you have to accept that there are different culture, so different ethical perspective, and that sometimes you have to listen to those different perspectives, right? And it's something that can also emphasize this aggressivity and the non-respect of some ethical norms online, which is when you're discussing with people you do not agree with because they are doing things like you feel they're not acceptable. Obviously, you will not have the same behavior with them as with people that you agree with. So the real world cannot be totally separated from the virtual world in terms of ethics. Everything is interconnected. We are bringing our ethics to the virtual world, and we are learning things from the virtual world that we will use in the real world, if I may say so. So that's something that is, perpetual interaction between those two worlds.
I see, Emmanuel. I guess that's precisely the reason that what Ato just commented on his answer, that importance of being ethical and to have a strong and ethical structure on your company, for instance, so you don't have any bias. You don't have any bias on your, for instance, AI, or even you don't have any bias on your recruitment process or something like that. You understand the human nature behind it, and you can indeed comprehend some cultural differences and comprehend that there are some peculiarities on someone's life, and these perhaps will be quite noticed when you interact person to person. You are very clear on your answer, Emmanuel. Thanks so much.
May I add just something about what you were saying, which is really important, I guess, is that we must not be idealistic or naive when we talk about ethics, right? Because you cannot remove biases. That's not the way it works. We all have biases all the time, right? And something that you don't feel is a bias might be considered as a bias for someone else, right? And especially when you're dealing with different culture. So the point when you are trying to interact with people is not to remove biases, which doesn't make sense. It's just to be able sometimes to respect the fact that other people do have a different perspective. That's, I think, something really important.
Yeah. So, Emmanuel, are there ethical limits in the virtual space? What should be done to make these limits obeyed and incorporated in and by different cultures and social means?
Actually, if I would be cynical, then let's be a little bit cynical. There is no ethical limits in the virtual space at all. No natural virtual ethical limits at all. So we're trying to set those limits. We are trying to create norms. We're trying to, create guidelines that will make people act in a way that we think is acceptable in some circumstances, right? But what we can see for now is that most of the time they're not respected. We see that we all agree that we have to respect privacy, that we have to respect non-discrimination, that we have to avoid having biases, etc., etc. But when you look deeper and you look closer to the situation, you see that those problems are still there because lots of people do not care about them first, and because those kind of problem, non-discrimination, privacy, etc., is really low in the priority list of some actors that are just here to make money, right? And because the stakes are so high in terms of finances, in terms of diplomacy, in terms of politics, etc., that sometimes those principles that we've set within the European Union, that have been set by other organizations such as the UNESCO, are not really respected. So this is what I call cosmetics, which is a narrative. We're just talking about ethics without doing ethics for real. We're just pretending that we're doing ethics because we want people to trust artificial intelligence, because we want them to buy and to use artificial intelligence because it's a huge market, right? So that's something that is clearly observable in the real world. Then we are trying to create limits. We are trying to make sure that in some cases AI will not be used to harm people and to hurt people. And we are trying in some places and some institutions, some people are trying to make sure that AI will benefit human beings. But here we also have a limit, which is what does that mean to benefit the world? Who knows what will benefit people in India? Who knows what would benefit people in Brazil? Who knows what would benefit people in other countries? We don't know. We can assume that we know that those people do want money, they want to be happy, they want this and want that, but we are not sure about that. So we're just, using our Western perspective, and we're trying to copy paste it to other culture, which does not work. That's my understanding. When you go to China, when you go to India, when you go to Saudi Arabia, people do have different perspective, different expectation than us in the Western world. So when we're trying to set those standards, those limits, what we're doing, we are actually introducing a bias, exactly what we want, what we don't want to do, what we're trying to avoid. Bias is we're introducing a Western bias in the way we think what those limits must be, right? My analysis of that is that it will not work. It will not work, and it's not working, and it will not work in the future. Once again, because stakes are so high that no one will constrain himself with rule, and especially not with moral norms or ethical norms that you do not agree with. Once China will be the leader in AI, they will not accept that the US or the European Union will explain them what they have to do and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. When you're a superpower, you impose your own perspective on others, right? You do not accept to be constrained by others. So this is the big issue that we have with those limits today. And then there is also another issue, which is related to our let's say Western culture, which is universalism. We feel like there are standards that can be universally applied to the whole world, and which is not true. That's not true. And what I can see was a discussion I've had with lots of people all around the world. In some places, people feel like there is kind of a neocolonialism from the West, digital neocolonialism, which is trying to import values from the West into countries that do not have the same values, right? And I've had this discussion with people in India, for example. It was like, okay, you're all Christian people. We are focused on the Vedic perspective of ethics, which is pretty different. We have issues that you don't have in your country. So how can you just tell us what should be those ethical limits? You don't know what those ethical limits must be for our country. So this is the kind of issue that we have. So I think, to be clear about my answer, is that there is no ethical limits, not at all. And I feel like all the attempts that have been made to create these standards, those limits, will fail, because we've not been able so far to discuss with each other on the same page, the same level, right? We are, and when I say we, I mean the West, European Union, Northern America, Canada, and the US. We are lecturing the world. And no one likes to be lectured. I don't like to be lectured as a French guy. I would not be lectured by the Chinese people. So I do understand that Chinese people do not like to be lectured by the US, right? So this is where I see, and we've written a paper with ATSO that will be published soon, I guess, about the risks that is related to this perspective, which is trying to impose your own perspective on others, which will actually increase existing tension between powers such as China and the US and India and the rest of the world. And that will not help. That will not help. That will deregulate artificial intelligence instead of regulating it through another, let's say, process, which would be compromises, discussion, listening to each other, etc.
I just want to ask you both guys a little question, a trick one, and this is not on the script at all, but I'd like to hear some insights, some brief insights from you both guys. Do you believe there is any universal value at all? Or do you believe that it is impossible to define some universal values due to this cultural difference that Emmanuel were mentioned just right now? I'd like to hear you first, Ato.
Just the first part of the answer to announce Emmanuel's answer is that we had in the Global AI Ethics Institute, we had a webinar with the topic of is there a universal code of ethics? So then we discussed this very important and interesting topic. So then I give the mic to Emmanuel to give you his answer, and then I'll give you mine.
A really interesting question. I will try to make it as short as possible. No, there is no such thing as universal values. Not at all. Not at all. And you can ask anyone anywhere. There will be no proof that there is such thing. We assume that there are universal values, but there is no proof. The only proof that have been given by people like Schwartz is that you have a universal structure of values. Meaning that you have value system in almost all culture, but those values are really different. That's the first thing, right? Second thing is that when we say universal, we are using it in a way that is not always correct. Universal means that everyone on Earth would have the same value, and I don't see any kind of value that I will share, for example, with the Taliban. So I feel like that's only one example. I can multiply those examples with other countries, with other people that I do not agree with. So I don't feel like we have this kind of universal value. And if we want to prove that there are universal values, meaning that values that are shared by all the people all around the world, we should go to all of the people all around the world and ask them, which is totally impossible. First thing. Second thing is that even if sometimes you have values, let's say friendship, which is the most used example coming from Aristotle. Let's say that we think that friendship is a value that is shared all around the world. It's not because you're using the word friendship that the meaning of the word is the same for everyone all around the world. I have traveled a lot, and I can tell you that in some places the word friend does not mean the same thing as what it means for me as a French guy. And even when I travel in France, depending on where you go, friendship can be something really different from a place to another. So technically speaking, there is no proof that there is any kind of value that is shared by all the people all around the world. I can hear some comments about what I'm saying that is, oh yeah, obviously it's not all, so do not use universal. There might be values that are shared by majority of people, certainly, but there is no such thing as universal values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my, not actually the answer, but comment would be in the sense of it depends how we define this universality, obviously. And from evolutionary perspective, I would say that obviously the humans as a species has a certain instincts that are kind of connecting us. So we can probably find in many, not only people, but mammals, some kind of instincts toward safety, toward sacrifice for our children, stuff like that. So basically, as a deep core, we can find something underneath. But then when we put it on a higher levels of ethics and those things that we can verbalize or that we can see as an artifacts of those deep instincts, then the things obviously get more complicated. But I would say that there is something that is kind of connecting us on a biological level in a certain way, you know. But how that then develops later, it depends significantly on the cultures, on the nurture versus nature and stuff like that.
I have only one more question. Ethics, virtual environment, social bonds, relationships, friendships changed when everybody had to go online, especially now with the COVID-19.
My comment would be this. What we witnessed on one side, obviously there was a polarization based on beliefs and approaches to life, I would say, between those who are more and less science-oriented. Also, what is interesting is that we can see big differences in the countries with the different levels of trust in the authority. And when I say authority, in practicality, this means in the government very often. So obviously, then again, people need to feel part of some tribe and need to have authority. So in this case, now we've seen that basically they are creating new ones. So I'm sometimes calling them the post-truth authorities and groups of people, because they kind of abandoned their trust in governments in some countries, and then they created some other structures in which they are going to believe in. Speaking from the EU perspective, it's obvious that the world, and especially in the virtual environment, is becoming more complex and nuanced, that many people and many of us can process, basically. So that opens room for a simplification. And of course, there are significant changes happening, for example, in the work relationships, who went virtual for many groups of people, not for all, but for example, the white collar workers. So this is also making interesting differences between different segments of the groups of people and kind of differentiating the educated and non-educated, the rich and the poor and stuff like that. So maybe just to conclude, every technology has its good and bad sides. We are using this virtualization to connect us with more people faster and with better quality nowadays, of course. We don't feel that much distance between people on one side. But on the other side, what I think that Emmanuel also mentioned before, there is a certain aspect of behavior that anonymity is providing people, because they're kind of disconnected from the consequences of their actions. So now one of the questions for me, for example, would be how to protect the children, how to protect the young minds that are now or could be attacked from a completely different side and in a different ways and on a completely, I would say, different scale than 20 or 30 years ago. So yeah, I would leave with that question for all of us.
Yeah, so interesting question. Obviously, what I would say is that obviously every kind of experience will at some point change the way you see ethics, right? Ethics is something that is evolving all the time. It's not something that is stable. Something that was acceptable 100 years ago would not be acceptable today, and we can find lots of examples of that in history. That the first thing. So yes, obviously going online using technology and using the digital has brought something new into the way we are thinking about ethics. And once again, this is related to what Aco was saying, the relation that we have with different people all around the world, right? We were making friends and we are making connection with people that we will not see physically speaking for a long time. Maybe we will never see them physically speaking in some cases. So obviously this changes the way we see ethics. On the other hand, something that is also important to stress is that we must not make that a generality. In lots of countries, lots of part of the world, and I would say most of the world, the digital is not yet there. Lots of people do not use this kind of technology. They are totally outside of this of the sphere of the virtual environment where we're talking about, right? So we also have to be conscious. And I don't talk only about countries that are, you know, a poor country that do not have access to technology. I can say in my own country, in France, lots of places, yeah, you don't have access to the internet, and you don't have people that are, you have people that are not using the digital. So we also have to make sure that we're not making a generality from something that we hear on the media, on TV, that we read, right? It's not as easy as it seems. And I think that lots of people now are actually understanding, and people of my generation, I'm not talking about the youngest generation, but people of my generation and the previous generation, they are now understanding how it is important to have physical relation. I'm not saying about, you know, touching people, but being in contact, at least visually, with other people is really important for your intellectual stability. So it also, at the same time, it is creating something new, but on the other hand, it is also reminding us how important it is to have this physical relation with people. And it is showing us that obviously the digital is really great, that we can do lots of things, and we can do, for example, you and us in Europe and in Southern America, we can connect and discuss, which is something that was not possible before. But at the same time, it is maybe raising awareness about the fact that interaction, real interaction, is something that is really needed, that is something really important, that is something that is really valuable, right? But obviously, any kind of experience that we will have as individual will have an impact on our ethical thinking. It will influence the way we see the thing. Aco was talking about the post-conventional morality. It's all about that. You learn things and you're building your ethics through your experience, things that you've lived and you did not like or you liked, and obviously your ethics will evolve along your life. And I'm sure you know about that. When you're young, you have lots of idealistic perspective on the world, and when you getting older, sometimes you will be a little bit cynical about the world. So your ethics will move, and obviously the use of technology is making us thinking differently. What is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
Liquid times, liquid relations, liquid postmodernity or modernity, as Moman said. Thanks so much, Emmanuel, for your insights. Thanks so much, Ato, for your insights. Vera, any final words, please?
Yeah, final words is just thank you a lot for your time, for being with us, for accepting our invitation. And thank you. Thank you in my name and on behalf of CEST.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Thiago. That was a real pleasure to be with you today, as usual.
Yes,
Okay.
I can only say thank you from my side, and hopefully the listeners will enjoy this podcast.
Thanks so much, you, Professor Emmanuel, Professor Ato. And for finally, I'd like to share with everyone that Professor Emmanuel and Professor Ato, they're both been invited for being part of Society and Technology Study Center here at the Polytechnical School, Universidade de São Paulo. The CEST do believe that their both presence will contribute a lot on the development of our research, our common research. Thank you so much for being here with us.
I can only say that hopefully we will stand up to the expectations in the future also.
Yes, lots of challenges, but thank you. That's really great, and I'm really happy. We've been collaborating for a while now, and we know that we have lots of things together, definitely to do together, and I'm happy about that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, my friends. Vera, thanks so much once again, and see you on the next time.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.